Come right in on that day.
Chapter 14. On a Friday early in October, Dan's wife sent him a message on his lunch break, asking if he'd figured out a costume for her friend's party that evening, which she'd told him about a month ago. He was beside himself. On Fridays, they ordered Thai food and watched nature documentaries. They were already waking up early on Sunday to visit the farmer's market. The anesthetizingly vague possibilities of those empty weekend hours dried up and disappeared, and he was left contemplating the ever-diminishing number of hours until he would be expected right back here at his desk. "It's too early for a costume party," he replied. "It starts earlier every year," she said. At 6:45, 15 minutes after they were supposed to have left, he decided, in a great huff, stamping room to room between his own closet and the guest bedroom where they kept their out-of-season clothes, that he would go as a poker player. Everyone there seemed to enjoy his costume about as much as he did. "Oh, nice," they would usually say. It wasn't that he didn't like her friends, only that everything he said around them seemed to land wrong, or not at all. Tiffany, a girl Rebecca met teaching a Pilates class, was dressed as a witch and performing tarot readings at a little table in the corner. About half of the party were gathered around, strewn over the wide couches and low chairs, in a mimic of their jackets, in a pile on the guest bed a room over. The rest chatted in the kitchen or smoked on the balcony. When Tiffany finished with Marissa, mousy, dressed in an ironic, sexy French maid getup, the audience turned to seek a new target. "Rebecca," said one. The rest joined in. Somewhat reluctantly, she sat on the folding plastic stool across from her acquaintance. Dan sometimes found it difficult to discern by the way they interacted which of his wife's friends she'd known and loved for years and which were a hairdresser she'd been to 3 times. The witch drew 5 cards and placed them in a cross. She flipped them one by one, hemming and hawing, and stammering, stumbling her way through each, the words tumbling from her mouth in a lilting rhythm which suggested continuity and forward progress. She had a habit, whenever it seemed as though some idea or complete thought was on the precipice, that the phrases and half-notions strung together theretofore had reached a point at which they must either cohere into something solid or dissolve into meaningless baby babble, of slowing her speech and scrunching up her face and staring absently at the top corner of the bookshelf, trailing off under the cover of deep thought, mumbling to fill the silence, stroking her chin and haltingly invoking the universe and Rebecca's divine purpose under her breath until she felt that the room had given her permission to turn another card. The final 2 were death and the devil. Everyone quieted. Rebecca raised one eyebrow. "Don't worry," said the witch. "I know these are kind of spooky looking." "And sounding," added Rebecca. "But it's not necessarily bad, or not all bad." It could mean a lot of things. Yeah, no, not bad. Several from the audience chimed in to lend their credibility to the floundering seer. It made Rebecca feel like she was standing in the bathroom at prom, and they were all gathered around staring at a pimple on her nose, biting their knuckles and telling her that it was hardly noticeable. So, what does it mean? She asked. Well, the witch tented her fingers on the tabletop and tucked her chin, examining the spread. Look at the cards and tell me what they mean to you. Her long nails were painted green. It means I'm going to die, said Rebecca. Tiffany shook her head, and her dreamcatcher earrings swung. It could signal a rebirth of some sort. Because something died, said Rebecca. We're all gonna die, said someone. A few people chuckled. The seer began to look around for whoever was next, and her eyes landed on Rebecca's husband. He pointed to himself like there was some kind of mistake, and tried to decline, but the crowd insisted. She fumbled with the cards. Just draw one, she said. We can keep it painless. Her lipstick was black. He could not find a good reason to say no. She was fanning the deck for him. He drew the devil. Oh no, said someone. The witch grimaced. I'm better at divination than shuffling. Nobody ever taught me. Here, draw one more. He drew. It was death. There was a gasp, which bothered him twice as much as the card. He felt embarrassed at the sour feeling in his stomach over a silly game. The room was silent. Tiffany took the card back and began to shuffle. Like I said, she said. She could no longer meet his eyes. It's really about whatever it means to you. What it means to you, I should say. On Sunday morning, Dan poured his coffee into a thermos and put on sneakers. He turned on the news while Rebecca did her makeup, and then turned it off a minute later. On Wednesday, 2 homesteaders had been killed on a Mexican farm whilst, according to witnesses, harassing the farmer and threatening to rape his daughter. It was the first thing to truly push the shooting off the front pages, and the news hadn't let up to take a breath since the report first came across the wire. If one kept it tuned to one station long enough, one would eventually get the impression of a camera on a pedestal at the center of the studio, panning 60 degrees onto a new set every 30 or 60 minutes. This desk glass, that desk wood, red backgrounds and blue backgrounds, or perhaps the sets rotated around a stationary lens, the talent like dolls on a Lazy Susan, sliding one desk after another into the frame, peopled with a mix and match cast of clay-sculpted faces and shiny, rock-solid hairdos, giving variations of the same recountings and the same opinions, jumping around now and then to cover various vigils and interview any friends or relatives they could track down. Sometimes a politician would come on air to give their take and pitch their spiel, or a Chiron-appointed expert in subterfuge or the cartels, perhaps the same expert in a different suit on a different day, would sit in one of the chairs to lay out detailed and lurid threats about tunnel diggers or the uncanny Sonoran ability to read minds, which one particular guest, a pastor as it were, non-committally attributed to Mayan folk magic. He sold books on his website which outlined how one might train one's mind to be resistant to such infiltration, as well as supplements which purported to coat the brain in a mucus that repelled their probing attacks. Rebecca drove. The market took place every Sunday at the old mission, which stood beside the new Jasperia Veterans Cemetery. Because space on the mesa was limited, the city dump abutted the far side of the burial ground. The lumpy gray soil and ash ran flat and desolate into the remote distance. The sky was an equally flat, equally gray sheet of cloud. It must have been moving, with the wind as it was, though it appeared steady. When they arrived, they found all of the stalls empty. There was a poster commemorating the victims of the shooting next to the sign which displayed the times for the market. They looked around. There were people here, but where? Someone was speaking in the big tent down the hill in a field next to the cemetery. Their voice boomed over the PA. It was a tinny echo by the time it reached them. The couple looked at each other, shrugged, and descended. Dan recognized the voice, growing louder as they approached, even if he could not place it. He pulled back the flap for his wife, and was startled at the size of the crowd within. They stood together near the rear. Harry Chewer paced the low stage at the front, his gaze fixed on some other plane. On Dan's other shoulder was a familiar face, though it took him several minutes to identify it as that of Brett Ensley. The tent was sweaty and packed. A few fanned themselves, but it made little difference. The audience was enthralled, and none more so, it seemed, than Brett. His eyes remained locked on Chewer's every gesture, his focus rapt on his every word, swaying, nodding, at points grinding his teeth. "The situation is simply untenable," the radio jockey was saying, "and we've tolerated these animals and the squeamishness of the left for far too long. You see what that nets you. 35 little girls dead. 44 little boys murdered. Children who lived their final moments in fear. All so that your liberal neighbor can feel enlightened, can feel good about themselves for hiring some greaser housekeeper. Enough." Brett seemed to agree quite vehemently. Dan could see the muscles flexing in his jaw. The youngest Ensley wasn't the only one either. People were clenching fists, practically snarling, towing the dirt floor like wild boars preparing to charge, eyes tucked away behind bulging brows, beady and glinting in the string lights with hate. The canvas absorbed much of the already dull daylight. "We put a phone in our pocket, and suddenly we think we're the smartest people to ever live. But that's a lie. And you want to know the ugly truth? All men are not created equal. Every society that came before us recognized this simple fact of nature. We recognized it up until not that long ago. The Greeks, the Romans, the Jeffersonians, that hypocritical ass." He was spitting. "The superior race lives a life of leisure, the sort of life that allows them to write philosophy and design spaceships. The lesser races toil in the fields and factories alongside the machines and other beasts of burden to make this possible. For God condemned the descendants of Ham that they should be hewers of wood and drawers of water for their masters. A few shouted, Amen. A few more, Hell yes. Fucking kill 'em all, said someone near the front. Some cheered him.